The morning rain painted silver streaks across the windows of Rosie's corner café, where Nina Lawson had spent the last 6 years perfecting the art of the perfect cappuccino. Her hands moved with practiced grace, creating delicate foam hearts atop steaming cups while her mind wandered to the half-finished manuscript waiting on her laptop at home. At 28, she had become a fixture in this little corner of Brooklyn, knowing every regular's order by heart and treating the worn wooden tables like old friends. The bell above the door chimed, and Nina glanced up to see a man shaking rain from his dark coat. He was tall, maybe in his mid-30s, with the kind of quiet confidence that came from boardrooms rather than coffee shops. His tailored suit seemed out of place among the mismatched furniture and vintage posters that gave Rosie's its charm. Nina watched as he chose a table near the window, pulled out his phone, and seemed to settle in for a long stay. Behind the counter, her coworker Danny was scrolling through his phone with increasing agitation. Nina wiped down the espresso machine and leaned over to see what had caught his attention. The local news blog showed a headline that made her stomach drop. Beloved Rosie's Corner Café sold to development firm. Her hands stilled. What? She whispered, reading over his shoulder. The article explained that old Mrs. Rosewood, who had owned the cafe for 30 years, had finally sold to a corporate buyer. The new owner planned to take over at the end of the month. Nina felt her world tilt. This place wasn't just her job, it was her sanctuary. Where she wrote between shifts, where she had celebrated her college graduation, where she had cried over her first rejection letter and rejoiced over her first published short story. The thought of some faceless corporation turning it into another sterile chain cafe made her chest tighten with anger. Can you believe this? Danny muttered, his voice rising. Some rich guy probably thinks he can swoop in and improve everything. He'll gut this place, fire half of us, and turn it into another cookie-cutter coffee shop with no soul. Nina's frustration bubbled over. She grabbed a towel and began wiping down the counter with unnecessary force. Of course. That's what these corporate types do. They see a place with character, with history, with a real community, and all they see are profit margins and quarterly reports. She was warming to her subject now, her voice carrying across the quiet cafe. I bet he's never even been here. Probably sent some assistant to take photos and run numbers. These people don't care that Mrs. Rosewood built this place from nothing, that she gave half the neighborhood their first job, that she kept us open during the pandemic even when she was losing money. Danny nodded vigorously. He probably drinks his coffee from some pretentious French press while reading stock reports. Wouldn't know a good cappuccino if it hit him in his perfectly moisturized face. Nina laughed bitterly, her hands still moving in agitated circles across the already clean counter. Oh, I'm sure he has very strong opinions about maximizing the space and updating the aesthetic. Translation: rip out everything that makes this place special and replace it with gray walls and minimalist furniture. Maybe add some industrial lighting and charge $8 for a latte. Don't forget the inspirational quotes painted on the walls, Danny added sarcastically. Live, laugh, latte, Nina said in a mocking tone. Or better yet, some nonsense about coffee being a lifestyle choice. Meanwhile, he'll be counting his money in some penthouse apartment, never once thinking about the people whose lives he's disrupting. The students who study here, the elderly couples who have their morning coffee at the same table they've sat at for 20 years, the single parents who can actually afford our prices. She was really on a roll now, her voice passionate and sharp. These vultures find something authentic and beautiful, and they can't help but destroy it. They think money and business degrees make them qualified to understand what makes a place matter to people. But they don't understand community. They don't understand that some things are more valuable than profit. The rain had softened to a gentle patter against the windows. Nina took a deep breath, realizing she had been ranting for several minutes. She glanced around the cafe and noticed that the man in the expensive suit was looking directly at her. His expression was unreadable, but something about the intensity of his gaze made her pulse quicken. He stood slowly, picking up his phone and walking toward the counter. As he approached, Nina could see the quiet amusement in his gray eyes, mixed with something else she couldn't quite identify. "That was quite a speech," he said softly, his voice deeper than she expected. "Very passionate. Very honest." He extended his hand. "I'm James Brennanthe. I'm the corporate vulture who bought your cafe." The world seemed to stop. Nina felt the blood drain from her face as Danny made a strangled sound beside her. Her hand automatically moved to shake his, operating on autopilot while her brain scrambled to process what was happening. She started, but words failed her completely. James's smile was slight, but his eyes held a warmth that contradicted everything she had just said about him. "I've been sitting here for the past hour, trying to understand what makes this place special. I think your speech just explained it better than any market research could have." Nina's mouth opened and closed. "Mr. Brennan, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I was just upset, and I said things without thinking." "No," he interrupted gently. "You said things you absolutely were thinking. That's what made it so valuable." He glanced around the cafe with what looked like genuine appreciation. "I'd like to talk to you. Privately. About the future of Rosie's and possibly your role in it." Nina's heart was hammering. "My role? I just insulted you for 5 straight minutes." "Exactly," James said, and this time his smile reached his eyes. "When can we talk?" Nina couldn't sleep that night. She lay in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling and replaying the day's events in an endless loop. James Brennanthe had left his business card, asking her to meet him at the cafe the following morning before opening. She had spent hours Googling him, finding articles about his business ventures, his reputation for turning around struggling properties, and surprisingly, his background in hospitality management, not corporate development as she had assumed. The next morning, she arrived at Rosie's to find James already there, sitting at the same table by the window. 2 cups of coffee sat waiting, and Nina noticed with surprise that he had somehow managed to brew them using Mrs. Rosewood's ancient espresso machine. "I hope I got it right," he said as she approached. "I'm a bit rusty, but I used to work in a cafe during college." Nina took a tentative sip. It was good, really good. Better than she expected from someone she had pegged as a corporate drone. She sat down across from him, still uncertain about where this conversation was heading. "I owe you an explanation," James began, his fingers wrapped around his own cup. "I didn't buy Rosie's to turn a profit. Well, not primarily." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. 5 years ago, my younger sister Hannah died in a car accident. She was 23, just out of college, full of dreams about opening her own cafe. Nina felt her chest tighten with unexpected emotion. "Before she died, she made me promise something. She made me promise that I wouldn't spend my whole life in boardrooms and conference calls, that I would remember what actually matters. She loved places like this, places with stories and warmth and character." James's voice was steady, but Nina could see the old grief in his eyes. "When I heard Mrs. Rosewood wanted to sell, I saw an opportunity to honor that promise." "I don't understand," Nina said softly. "If you wanted to honor her memory, why not just keep everything the same?" James smiled sadly. "Because keeping things the same isn't always the same as keeping them alive. Nina, this cafe is struggling. Mrs. Rosewood didn't want to worry anyone, but she's been operating at a loss for 2 years. The equipment is failing, the building needs repairs, and foot traffic has decreased since the new shopping center opened 3 blocks away." Nina felt a chill run through her. She had suspected business was slow, but she hadn't realized how serious it was. "So what are you proposing?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I want to save this place, but I need help from someone who understands what makes it special. Someone who clearly cares deeply about preserving its soul." He leaned forward slightly. "Your speech yesterday wasn't just anger. It was love. You understand this cafe in a way I never could just by looking at balance sheets. What exactly would I do? Nina asked cautiously. Partner with me. Help me modernize without losing the heart of the place. You know the regulars, you understand the community, and from what Mrs. Rosewood told me, you have ideas about expanding the menu and hosting events that she never had the resources to implement. James pulled out a folder. I've drafted a proposal. You would become the general manager with a significant stake in the business. We would work together to transform Rosie's into something that can survive another 30 years. Nina's hands trembled as she took the folder. You're offering me partial ownership? Hannah believed that the people who care most about a place should have a say in its future. I think she was right. Over the next 2 weeks, Nina and James worked together daily, and slowly, her initial resistance began to crack. She discovered that beneath his polished exterior was someone who genuinely listened, who asked thoughtful questions, and who seemed to value her input not just as a formality but as essential to his vision. They started small. New equipment that didn't change the aesthetic. A redesigned menu that honored Mrs. Rosewood's classic recipes while adding Nina's creative touches. Evening events like open mic nights and book clubs that brought new energy to the space without alienating the regulars. But not everyone was happy. Danny and several other staff members remained suspicious of James's intentions. Some of the longtime customers grumbled about the changes, even minor ones. Nina found herself caught in the middle, defending James to her skeptical coworkers while also pushing back against his ideas when they went too far. One evening, after a particularly difficult staff meeting where Danny had openly accused James of gentrifying the cafe, Nina found herself alone with James in the empty shop. They were reviewing the day's receipts when a pipe burst in the kitchen, sending water flooding across the floor. For the next 3 hours, they worked side by side, mopping water, salvaging supplies, and calling emergency plumbers. James shed his jacket and rolled up his sleeves, working as hard as Nina without complaint. When they finally collapsed exhausted on the floor, surrounded by wet towels and the smell of old coffee, Nina started to laugh. What's funny? James asked, looking at her with bewildered amusement. I was just thinking about what I said that first day. About you counting money in your penthouse while other people deal with real problems. She gestured at the soaked floor. This is pretty real. James smiled. For what it's worth, I don't have a penthouse. I have a studio apartment with a leaky faucet that I keep meaning to fix. As they sat there in the dim light of the closed cafe, something shifted between them. Nina realized that James wasn't the enemy she had imagined. He was just a person, carrying his own grief and dreams, trying to do something meaningful with his resources. Thank you, she said quietly. For trusting me with this. For actually listening. Thank you for giving me a chance, James replied. Even after I proved you spectacularly wrong about me. Nina laughed. Well, you were pretty understanding about me calling you a vulture to your face. That was my favorite part, James admitted with a grin. No one has been that honest with me in years. 3 months into their partnership, Rosie's Corner Café had found its rhythm. The morning regulars still claimed their favorite tables, but now evening crowds filled the space for poetry readings and acoustic music nights. Nina's writing corner had become official, a cozy nook with comfortable chairs where aspiring authors gathered weekly to share their work. The cafe was alive in a way it hadn't been in years, buzzing with energy while maintaining the warmth that had always defined it. Nina stood behind the counter one quiet afternoon, watching James teach a young teenager named Theo how to create latte art. Theo was a scholarship student from the neighborhood who James had quietly hired as an apprentice. Nina had learned that James did this sort of thing often, small acts of generosity that he never mentioned unless someone else brought them up. The key is confidence, James was saying, his hands guiding Theo's as they poured the steamed milk. If you hesitate, the pattern falls apart. Trust yourself. Nina smiled, remembering how she had once accused this man of not understanding community or caring about people. She had been so spectacularly wrong. That evening, after closing, James asked Nina to stay. He seemed nervous, which was unusual for him. They sat at the window table where they had first really talked, and James pulled out an old photograph. "This is Hannah," he said softly, showing Nina a picture of a young woman with bright eyes and an infectious smile. "The day she told me about her café dream. She wanted to create a space where people could feel at home, where artists and dreamers could find encouragement. She called it a third place, somewhere between work and home where community happens naturally." Nina studied the photograph, seeing the family resemblance in the shape of their eyes and the way they smiled. "She would have loved what we're doing here." "I hope so," James said. "But there's something I need to tell you. When I bought this place, I had planned to run it for a year, get it stable, and then move on to the next project. That's what I do, I fix things and then I leave." Nina's heart sank. She had grown used to working with James, to their easy collaboration and the way they challenged each other to think differently. "But I don't want to leave," James continued, looking directly at her. "I've spent 5 years running from anything that felt permanent, telling myself I was honoring Hannah by staying mobile, staying uninvested. But I think I was just afraid. Afraid of caring too much about something and losing it like I lost her." He reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of touching hers. "This place, these people, you've reminded me that the point isn't to avoid loss. The point is to build something worth losing. Hannah didn't want me to protect myself from pain. She wanted me to live fully, to connect, to take risks on things that matter." Nina felt tears prickling her eyes. She understood what he was trying to say because she felt it too. Somewhere between the arguments about menu changes and the late nights planning events, between the burst pipe and the first successful poetry reading, she had fallen for this complicated, generous man who was trying so hard to honor his sister's memory by doing something good. "I was wrong about you," Nina said softly. "That first day, I thought I had you all figured out. I thought you were just another person who saw the world in terms of profit and loss. But you see it in terms of possibility and connection. You see what things could become without forgetting what made them valuable in the first place." James finally closed the distance between their hands, his fingers intertwining with hers. "You weren't entirely wrong. I was that person once. But you reminded me of something I had forgotten, that passion and authenticity matter. That speaking truth, even uncomfortable truth, is a gift." The next morning, Nina and James called a meeting with the entire staff and several of the regular customers. Danny was there, still somewhat suspicious but softened by the obvious improvements to the cafe and James's genuine respect for the staff. "We wanted to share some news," James began, standing beside Nina at the front of the cafe. "And to ask for your input because this place belongs to all of you as much as it belongs to us." Nina took over. "We're establishing the Hannah Brennan Community Foundation. A portion of the cafe's profits will go toward scholarships for young people interested in hospitality, small grants for local artists, and support for other independent cafes trying to survive in this neighborhood." The room was quiet for a moment, and then Mrs. Rosewood, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, began to clap. Others joined in, and Nina saw tears in some eyes. "Hannah believed that success meant lifting others up," James added, his voice thick with emotion. "This cafe was failing, and now it's thriving. But that success should ripple outward, should help others the way so many of you helped us figure out what this place needed to be." After the meeting, as the crowd dispersed, Danny approached them. "I owe you an apology," he said to James. "I judged you before I knew you. I assumed the worst because that's usually the safe bet with rich guys buying up neighborhood places." "You weren't wrong to be skeptical," James said sincerely. "If Nina hadn't called me out that first day, I might have made terrible decisions. Sometimes we need people to challenge us, to hold us accountable to being better than our worst instincts." As the day wound down, Nina found herself back at the window table with James, watching the neighborhood come alive in the evening light. She thought about the manuscript sitting on her laptop, the novel she had been too afraid to finish. James had been reading chapters, offering encouragement and honest feedback. He had taught her that fear of failure was just fear of caring deeply enough about something that failing would hurt. "I finished it," she said suddenly. "The novel. Last night. All 90,000 words." James's face lit up. "Nina, that's incredible. Are you happy with it?" Terrified and proud and uncertain and excited, she admitted. "All at once." "That sounds like the right feeling," James said, pulling her close. "That sounds like something real." Outside, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. Inside Rosie's corner café, the lights glowed warm and welcoming. The espresso machine hissed, conversation hummed, and someone laughed at something their friend said. It was just a café, just a small corner of Brooklyn, but it was also proof that beautiful things could grow from honest confrontation, that admitting wrongness was the first step toward rightness, and that sometimes the people we judge most harshly become the ones who help us see ourselves most clearly. Nina looked at James and saw not the corporate vulture she had imagined, but a man trying to honor love and loss by building something meaningful. And he looked at her and saw not just an angry barista, but a truth-teller who had helped him find his way back to authenticity. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" he asked. "For hearing me that day. For not walking away when I gave you every reason to." James smiled, that warm, genuine smile that still made her heart flutter. "Thank you for being honest. For showing me that sometimes the hardest truths are the most important ones to hear." And in that moment, surrounded by the place they had saved together, Nina understood that the best relationships, romantic or otherwise, were built not on perfection but on willingness to be truthfully, vulnerably, courageously human with each other. She had called him a vulture, and he had heard a cry for what mattered most. He had offered her partnership, and she had learned to see beyond her assumptions. Together, they had created something neither could have built alone. The cafe would face challenges ahead. There would be difficult decisions and disagreements and moments of doubt. But they would face them together, with honesty as their foundation and respect as their guide. And that, Nina realized, was the real happy ending. Not perfection, but genuine connection. Not easy answers, but honest questions. Not avoiding mistakes, but learning from them together. Outside, the neighborhood hummed with life. Inside, two people who had started as accidental adversaries sat together in comfortable silence, knowing they had found something rare and precious. They had found partnership built on truth, community built on care, and love that had grown from the fertile soil of honest confrontation and mutual respect. And in the corner, if you looked carefully, you might have seen a photograph of a young woman with bright eyes and an infectious smile, watching over the cafe that had become her legacy, finally understanding that her brother had kept his promise after all.